Okay, I have some questions here. I'll go ahead and just answer them here in the video. So the first one, dangerous things. How did the name come to be, and what prompted you to start? Um, well, I'll start with the starting first. In 2005, I got an implant put into my hand here, a little transponder, and I used that to get in and out of my office. I then wrote a book, RFID Toys, in 2007. The whole time there's like kind of media coverage and stuff. And by 2013 or so, there was a lot of people that were emailing me wanting to kind of follow suit. They wanted to get their own implants and things like that. The Maker Revolution was underway, and so there was a lot of people that were, starting to build electronics projects in their garages again. And that coupled with the book and, introducing the idea that electronics hobbyists could build their own things like access controllers or modify their cars or whatever. It just got to be that a lot of people wanted to know how to get an implant, and so I needed to figure out a way to either ignore that or put a business model around it because it was taking up a lot of time. And so I decided to launch Dangerous Things, and the goal of Dangerous Things was two things. One, the first goal was to ensure that the things that we sold were safe because people were just sourcing things from any old place, like industrial tags or like crappy little tags that were going into car keys that are not biosafe. And the other goal was to make sure that they could be implanted safely. So, we started working with body piercers and things like that. But the name, Dangerous Things, it's kind of it's kind of tongue in cheek. And I, I was sitting there and I was looking at my screen. I first launched a trial store, e-commerce store under store.amel.net. And I was just like, yeah, I'll just try to sell these kind of like, but then I realized, well, it should be something, it should be more of a business than just, weird chip guy selling things. And so I, um, I thought about the name, what could we do, and all that. And I, over the years from 2005 on, really, it's just been nothing but a lot of people, um, you know, s- challenging it. Oh, this is dangerous, and all that kind of stuff. And so I was kind of like, well, why don't we just call it Dangerous Things? If you think it's so dangerous, we'll call it that, and then that'll be our thing. We'll sell these dangerous things, and when it's the exact opposite. But it's just a funny play on the fear that really was prevalent, particularly early on. So yeah, I chose the name, and somebody else had the domain, but I offered to buy it. I think it was like a couple grand or something like that, and then started building around that and building the branding. And it kind of fit because we were, the customers are cutting edge customers, bleeding edge, you might say, technology adopters, and you know, they're definitely not. They are taking a little bit of a risk. It was a bit of an unknown on us, right? They didn't know who we were and who I was, or if this stuff was even really all that safe, even though it was. But so the point is, it just kind of worked. It worked for early biohacking customers for sure. Um, yeah. So next question: do implanted chips wear out over time? If yes, how many years before an implant is replaced? Excuse me. So this is a multifaceted question because um, so there's no battery, so there's nothing to charge. There's no battery that goes, that gets overcharged or charged too many times, and then you have to replace it. That doesn't happen. The materials of the implants are going to be in your body forever. They way outlive you. But the performance of the electronics, so this is where we're kind of getting the nuance. Um, for example, there's two things whenever it comes to electronic memory, particularly like digital memory. There is data retention period and there is data write cycle count. And so the retention period is if I write data to a memory block, how long will that data be readable for before the signal degrades to the point where it's indistinguishable from a one or a zero? And the data retention on some chips is 10 years. The data retention on Vivoki, which we haven't talked about yet, but Vivoki chips, which is the program. Vivoki is a company I started in 2018 to address other parts of solving bigger problems with chip implants, but those have a data retention of 50 years. But whether it's 10, 25, or 50 years, um, the write cycle count means how many times you can write to a memory block. So if I wrote some data to a chip in 2005 and then came back in 2010, 5 years later and wrote some more data, then that's the second write to the chip, and that refreshes that signal. So the data retention timer or clock starts over. So not from that point that I've written to it again, another 10 years or 25 or 50 years. The write cycle counts generally range from 100,000 writes to 500,000 writes. So if you had a chip with a 10-year data retention and 100,000 write cycle count, you could write to it every day. Every day you could write to it, and you would still get like 37 years or something out of it. And if you wrote to it every 10 years, then you would obviously well exceed a single human lifespan. So um, for all intents and purposes, it's it's a lifetime thing. It'll work for the rest of your life. Um, but if you want to get really nitty gritty and nitpicky about it, then we basically try to design things that are going to work for at least 30 years is the goal. That's the intention about stuff that we do. But as I said, with the Vivoki stuff like the Spark 2 and the upcoming Apex, those products, they all have a 50-year data retention and a 500,000 write cycle. So even if you wrote to it once, um, or we write to it in the factory, it's going to be a good 50 years. Uh, utility, even if you never changed anything or did anything with it. So yeah, I think it's pretty good. So, but to address the idea of replacing the implant, this is why one of the many reasons why all of the implants that we have, they do not have a biobond or a porous coating on them like an animal chip, like a pet or a dog or a cat chip would have. The dog or cat chip, it has the glass tube, and then has this porous biobond or parylene or some kind of coating on it that's very full of holes, and your tissue grows into that to lock everything in place. And in a cat or a dog, it's really necessary to do that because they have very loose scruff, like the fascia tissue is very loose. In humans, it's not very loose at all. It's very dense, so we don't need it. And two, it makes it very easy to replace things or remove them if you need to. So you don't have to really cut it out. You just kind of make a little incision and it pops out. So it's very easy to replace or upgrade if you ever needed to. But upgrading, again, you don't really need to do that because, um, I mean, technology advances quickly, yes, but people, standards, applications don't. They move very slowly. And so this chip that I got in 2005, which at the time that type of chip was very old. That chip is still useful. I can still buy readers that read it online for like $10. So, you get a chip, you're probably much more likely to get a second chip elsewhere than to replace or remove it. Next question. Do you have any privacy concerns with implanted chips? Who has access to data on the implanted chip and what sort of data can be stored on them? Also, what data should one not store? Oh, that's a good question. So the first part, the privacy concerns, not really. And the reason is that just like a credit card or a contactless tap card or a work badge or a fob in your keychain, for the most part, it's consensual. You stick the device up to the reader um, when you want to use it. So with with the utility that you have, it is possible to kind of sneak up on someone and read their badge through their pocket or something if you had nefarious plans. But there's different scopes of risk. So what we do for dangerous things, in particular, the types of transponders that we sell for that stuff, not counting the Vivoki stuff, they're not very secure, and they're not really meant to be secure. NFC, for example, is meant to be read and share data with, and all of that. So when it comes to your risk profile, it really depends on what scope you're using it within. And for dangerous things, we call that the personal scope because it's your front door that you're unlocking. It's your computer you're logging into. It's your car that you're starting or whatever you've done to make your world work with the implant that you have. And so the reason that that's not really a big issue and it's not very much of a risk profile is that when you are dealing with these personal scope applications, an attacker that's going to go after trying to read something, some transponder that you have, they're most likely going to be a random person, and they're going to be looking for something they don't need to know who you are in order to use it, like a credit card, for example. So if somebody was like, okay, well, I can read your credit card, contactless credit card data through your wallet with a special reader, I could sit next to any person on the train, read that, get the data, run off and go do something nefarious with it without having to know anything else about the person. They've already stolen the goods, right? So when it's a personal scope thing, if some attacker randomly read happen to get close enough to read a transponder, which again, these transponders have significantly less range than a card or a key fob. If they did get close enough to read something like this, then they have a random number and a serial number basically. Um, they have no idea who you are, what that serial number does, what it even means. It's kind of like finding a random key on the ground. You don't know what it goes to. It's useless to you basically. But if you find a credit card on the ground, you know immediately what to do with it. You don't need to know anything about the person who lost it. So there's this kind of context that matters when it comes to what your risk profile is. But when you start talking about things that are bigger applications beyond your personal scope, logging into websites, banking services, things like that. That's where Vivoki comes in, and Vivoki is all about cryptographically secured devices that can cryptographically prove their authenticity, not just store encrypted data, but actually perform encryption so that you can send a challenge to them and say, prove that you are who you say you are. Talking to the chip, and the chip can respond to that with a cryptogram encrypted process, return that response. You can validate through cryptography that, yep, they were talking to the right chip. So that opens up the door for a lot more interesting things like medical records, patient identity, payments, all these kind of things. And that's what Vivoki is working on. When you say, who has access data on the chip and what sort of data is stored on them, well, who has access is whoever's reading it and whoever has unlocked that access. So again, for the simple transponders, its data is meant to be shared. So you write some data on it. You can, it could be a contact information, it could be a URL to something, it could be anything. And whoever you present that that chip to, whatever reader you present it to, has an opportunity to read it at that point. But again, you determine what you want to put on those transponders. Usually it's something you want to share anyway. It might be like a LinkedIn profile, whatever it is. Your point is you're sharing. It's like a digital business card kind of thing. And for the most part, again, you're not having nefarious people on the train getting really, really close to your hand to read it. I mean, this is why the transponders are in the hand, so that you can present them very close proximity to a reader or to a phone. If you could read things, far away, then you wouldn't even need to put it in the hand. You could put it somewhere else, and it would be readable, but it's not. So for the most part, it's a consensual process. You're presenting it to a reader, and you're intending to share that data. Whatever data you want to share, you write to the thing. If you don't want to share data, don't write it to the chip. I guess probably the important thing, and the way this question is structured about data, who can read it or access it, it's an assumption that the chip is active at all times, like connected to the internet or something. And that's just not how these work at all. Every movie you've ever seen where there's a chip implant and it's tracking somebody or whatever is all bullshit. It's like, it's Hollywood fluff. And the important thing is there's no battery. It's a passively coupled device, meaning it doesn't have any power. When you're not presenting it to a reader, there's no power in the chip. It can't do anything. So it only has power and can communicate with a reader that you're presenting it to. That's it. Otherwise, it's an inert piece of garbage that doesn't do anything. So there's no point, there's no like somebody else could access the data. Not really. Um, what data you should not store on the chip. So again, this kind of comes down to what kind of chip you have. But for the most part, the dangerous things transponders, the generic RFID and NFC transponders, you don't want to store things that are secure, like that you want to keep secure. So for example, in the world of Bitcoin, you have your Bitcoin wallet address. You have a public address that you share with people so they can send you money. But they have a private address that you don't want to share with anybody because that private address is what you use to send money. So you don't want to put your private address on the chip because then you're sharing it with anybody who scans it and then they could take your money. So there's just definitely things you don't want to put on there. But it's a subjective question, right? So don't put stuff on there that you don't want to share with people. If you do want to store it because you like the idea of in-body storage, there are chips with bigger capacities like 8 kilobytes or there's some other options coming down the line with more storage, but then you would probably want to encrypt that data first so that if anybody did read it, it's kind of useless to them. But for you, you've stored it, you have a key to decrypt it somewhere else and all of that. So um, fourth question, can chip serial numbers be cloned to replicate originals? Yes, of course. Serial numbers are not secure. This is the whole point that I've been trying to make about transponders is they have serial numbers, and if you're only using a serial number as your method of security, which unfortunately a ton of access control systems, HID procs, like all these badge fob card, things for apartment complexes, all of them use the serial number. They don't do any kind of anything else. They just read the serial number. So of course, there's no protection of that serial number. That serial number is spit out to any reader that asks for it when you present the fob or take a reader and put it up to the chip. So yes, absolutely. And in fact, we have a couple of products, the XEM and the Next. Those chips have in them, particularly the low frequency stuff, 125 kilohertz, though that has a T5577 chip in it, which is designed to be able to not only change the serial number, but also change how it communicates to the reader so that it can emulate a ton of different low frequency badge types like EM chips, HID, IWID, Indala. There's just a ton of these types of chips that have slightly different communication protocols, all in the 125 kilohertz frequency family, and the T5577 can emulate all of them. So we sell that as like, hey, if you have an apartment key or a fob or something, you might be able to clone that into your implant and then use that rather than the fob or your work badge or whatever. So absolutely, that is an application. When it comes to, again, bigger things like secure applications, then the serial number becomes irrelevant. What you're really doing is you're presenting that cryptographic challenge to the chip that can support, doing that. So again, Vivoki Spark 2, Vivoki Apex, those are kind of more advanced implants. Apex is coming, but those are going to be able to do all kinds of different encryption challenge responses. So you're basically saying, you say you're this serial number, but prove it. And then the chip has to do that performance of that cryptographic response, and then we can validate that. So at that point, the whole idea of like cloning the serial number would break. And this is why you can't clone payment chips, right? Payment chips use encryption as they should, right? So you can't take a contactless payment card and then clone that into an implant. No, it's not going to work. But what you can do is essentially one of the services we offer is we convert the card. So particularly in the EU where they have these like kind of key fob things where it's just a contactless token. It's not a card, there's no contact thing where you slide it. It's just a contactless thing you tap like a key fob or something. We can take the chip out, convert it into an implant, but then it just does payment. There's no other options it can do really for the most part. And then also it expires and you have to take it out in a few years, which people, I figured that would be a deal breaker, but we have a lot of customers that send us fobs for conversion. So it's kind of interesting. Okay, so do chips somehow communicate to outside networks? Do you think chips pose some kind of cyber risk in general? So again, I think that question's already been answered. No, it doesn't communicate with outside network. It doesn't have any ability to transmit or anything. In fact, the chips themselves, even when powered by the reader, they don't broadcast. They don't use the electric field like your cell phone does or like a radio, CB radio or something. They use the magnetic field generated, which is this very small sphere, which is why these are near field or close proximity devices. And that modulates that magnetic field, but it's not like transmitting out or broadcasting anything. So, even eavesdropping on the conversation with radio gear that's far away is very, very, very difficult, if not impossible. You have to kind of compromise the reader in order to try to sniff the conversation. But again, if it's an encrypted conversation, it's encrypted, so nothing's happening there. Chips pose a cybersecurity risk. Oh, well, I think actually the chips could provide a lot of privacy and security if implemented with, like the Vivoki in a secure way. So improving security without compromising convenience, that's kind of the goal of Vivoki anyway, and of chip implants in general. So that's what we're working on. Can chips be hacked? If yes, how can they be hacked? What kind of security measures have been put in place to stop any form of hacks? So again, the chip is not really hacked. Chips, they're designed, the RFID protocols and NFC protocols are designed to give out the serial number freely to anybody who asks. So it's not a hack per se. It's more of like I read that and now I'm pretending to be that. So the chip itself is not attacked in any way like that. There are certain kind of chips that are in like payment cards or passports or things that people have attempted to attack, and they have had success in breaking the encryption in certain cases. But at the moment, as implants go, the implants that do the leverage security and cryptography, they use algorithms that have not been hacked or cracked at this point. For people who are unfamiliar with how chips come together, could you describe the technical process behind making the chips? How operational it is before and after being implanted? What programming goes in the chips? Does any form of encryption go in these chips? Okay, maybe I should have run through all these before talking, but again, we're covering this again. Essentially, the chip is a silicon die. It's a very small piece of raw silicon microchip, and then that has lithography done on it. So all the firmware, all the way that it operates is built in at the silicon level for almost all of them, all the chips, except for the Vivoki Apex. We'll get into that. So it basically means that how the chip operates is set. And so you take that and they will, depending on what product we're making, that will either go directly into the glass tube in like a flip chip process onto a carrier board, and then we attach an antenna, put that inside a glass tube with resin that's safe, biocompatible. The tube is laser sealed, so it's melted together, and it's all just a compact like ampule. And then that gets put into a syringe, and then EO gas sterilization happens, so it's all sterilized in a batch, and then that's how we ship. There are other products that are our Flex line, which is kind of a biopolymer encapsulated device that's very flexible. Those tend to use either MOB or COB encapsulated things. So they take that bare silicon die and then they stick that into a package of some sort, like an IC package. And then we use that and then put the antenna on and all that. But in general, we might do some programming in the chip after it's constructed, like setting up options. So for example, the Next has an NTAG 216 NFC chip in it, as well as a T5577. So 2 chips in 1 implant. The NTAG 216 is an NFC chip. It has some options that aren't not conducive for implants. Some of those options include being able to lock memory bytes so they can't be changed. And that's a bad idea because people want to be able to change the content of their implant. And so what we do is we disable those lock bits. We say basically, hey, lock bits, lock yourselves so that you can't turn on any other locks for any other memory pages. And so that just protects the tag from accidentally becoming locked, because you can use like an app on your phone and you say, ooh, what's protection mean? I'll turn on protection because that sounds good. And then boop, and all of a sudden your implant is locked forever. So there are other types of precautions we do that protect the configuration bits that are in the memory structures and things like that. But for the most part, we try to leave it as open as possible so that the customers can safely change the content that's written to the user memory spaces of those chips. So let's see. What is your opinion on people saying that chips make one more vulnerable to being tracked or having their data easily stolen? I think those people don't know what the hell they're talking about, and frankly, I'm super tired of talking about it too. Just look into it even a little bit before opening your mouth, is what I'm saying. Like, I've seen supposed experts be like, "Well, chips could track you around." Are you basing that on the movie you saw? What the hell? I'm just getting irritated about this kind of question. It's been 16 years of this. No. The short answer is no. And we've already talked about the security and the privacy in the context of personal scope versus larger scope. If anything, the tracking thing's ridiculous. No, not at all. It's not Hollywood, guys. This is, can you find a lost pet with a chip? No, you can't. You might think so because the marketing departments of these pet transponders have been using words like pet tracker and tracking chip, but it's not. Call your vet and say, hey, I lost my dog. He's got a microchip. Can we go find him? He'll be like, sorry. Someone has to find the dog or cat, bring it to a shelter, and they scan it at very close range, find the chip, and get the ID number. Then they call the database and they go, who's the owner of the cat 156978823? And then they call you. So there's no tracking. It's ridiculous. As far as like having your data stolen, no. Again, no. If anything, you can use it as two-factor authentication. You can use it as two-factor security. You can improve your security with a chip implant. Unlike, for example, if you have a wearable device that's doing that, so a ring or a bracelet or something like that that has the ability to have two-factor authentication built in. I've seen some security products coming that are like that, or like a a token that you wear on your keychain. Well, if you lose your keys and or you're like a lot of people, they'll secure their laptop or something, or the accounts that their laptop connects to with a key fob or a token, a security token of some kind. They'll put that token in the laptop bag because again, they don't want to manage this thing. So they stick it in there, and then the laptop bag walks away with the laptop and the security token. So now they've just given the thief access to everything, including security tokens. So Having it as an implant, it carries these critical identity capabilities and security authenticity capabilities with you at all times. It's always available. You don't even know it's there. It's like your kidneys. It just does its job for you. And you don't even notice it's there. You can't lose it. You can't forget it. Like the fact that it is an implant um, is again about keeping convenience high while raising security at the same time without compromising convenience, right? So this is the whole premise of behind Vivoki, which is the company working on the cryptographically secure transponder implants. Um, we want to be able to say, yeah, I can pay for stuff at my, at the coffee shop. Boop, I can get into my apartment. Boop, I can log into this banking website. Boop, I can, you know, deal with whatever I need to deal with, and all in a secure way. And it's not something, you could pop in a laptop bag and have it walk away. So yeah, short answer is no. Um, how's being microchipped benefited you? Has it made life easier? Have you had any downside to being microchipped? Well, I mean, like I said, I've had it for many years, 16 years, I guess now. And it's it goes in, you kind of fiddle with it for a little bit because you're like, it's novel, it's new, and then you kind of forget about it and you just start going about your day. So, a lot of people say, well, it's not worth getting just the most simple application, key replacement, right? People say, well, it's not worth getting, going through surgery, which it's actually less involved than an ear piercing, but going through surgery to just replace my keys, I'm fine using my keys. Well, that's true. And, the days that you lose your keys, those are annoying, but really it's more about the entire rest of your life that you're not losing your keys, but you're managing them, right? Again, it's about this management concept where for 16 years, I haven't really had to worry about, do I have my keys? I walk out the door and I'm not like checking my pocket because his key is there, right? So that's really the big difference. So, if you think about like Adam Sandler has the song that came out like last year, something like Phone Wallet Keys, was part of his comedy special. Those are the three things that everybody needs. They're like modern day Tamagotchi. And I've gotten rid of 1/3 of that management burden, and it feels great. And I really, really want to get rid of the wallet burden. I want to be able to leave my wallet at home, be able to tap and get gas and food and whatever I need, and then come home and get in my door and like log into my computer, all that stuff without having to worry about these tokens that I have to manage all the time. Um, there's been like zero downside. Like honestly, no downside. I think the only thing that happened was I realized after a while I had this car and when I would get out of the car, it had a really long door. It was like a sport version, so it wasn't the normal car is like a four door and the doors are short, but this was the sport version, so the door was long, extra long. So it kind of went way out, and then when I would close it, I would tend to drag the top of my hand along the length of the door and like close the door like that. And that just happened to run right along where the implant sat under my skin, and I kind of felt a little pinch. I was like, oh, that's not very comfortable. So I just changed the way I closed the door, and that was it. Like literally, in 16 years, that's the only thing I could think of that is even remotely a hassle at all about any kind of downside, if you call it that. Um, so yeah, no issues. And right now, I have six devices. So there's one here, here in this. It's like a little flat polymer piece here. I have a big one here. I got scratched. That's not from the implant. And then I have one here and here. So they've been there for a very long time, all of them, and I kind of some of them I switch out because they're prototypes, but I'll switch out for the product version or whatever. But I mean, you can't really tell that I have them. It's like this is the perfect for me. It's perfect because it's about function and utility. It's not about making a big statement with what I'm doing, and it's all just been upsides, no downsides really. Okay, do you think there are ethical boundaries crossed with chip implants in general? Nope. Not unless you're, I don't know, like it's subjective, right? Like some people literally think it's an ethical boundary to get an injection at the doctor or to cut your beard. It's a religious thing, or like, that's a subjective question. And I really don't see any ethical issues with wanting to upgrade your capabilities by putting one of these in. I see more ethical issues with getting a simple ear piercing because when you get a chip implant, it's an injection. It goes in, ploop, they put it in, they feel that it's like 5 to 10 seconds maximum. There's a Band-Aid. It's healed up. You can take the Band-Aid off after 24 hours. You can shower, wash your hands. You're basically good to go. Risk is very, very, very low, and from a health perspective. But even an ear piercing, you got this piece of metal through two holes, and then your body's trying to heal around the metal. There's ample risk for infection. There's ample risk for, having to man it and keep it clean, and people don't do it. They get keloid scars. They get all kinds of problems, complications, allergies to the jewelry. Yet we don't bat an eye at that kind of thing. So, in terms of the health risk, that's the only thing, that's the only place where I see an ethical dilemma, if there is any. Um, and really, it's just really centered around risk. There's risk in everything. There's risk in drawing a breath, but in terms of risk for getting a chip implant versus an ear piercing, it's extremely low. Um, I think probably the only other ethical question that might come down the road, uh, I don't know. I don't see one unless, oh, okay. So there was some talk, like there's these laws that are popping up in different states about RFID implants becoming mandatory, right? That doesn't really have to do with the implant. It just has to do with like everything else around it. So the idea is that employer might say, well, to get this job or to whatever, you have to get an implant. I don't see that ever being the case, but for some reason, like 7 states have like knee-jerk reaction passed laws about this, and I do agree that it should not be that a company should not be able to mandate that you get an implant to be able to get a job. But at the same time, those laws tend to go way too far, and they'll say things like, "Well, this company can't even incentivize it." Like, we'll buy the implant and the service for you if you want to get one. It's not mandatory, but if you want to get one, we'll pay for it, kind of thing. They make that illegal too, which is bullshit. And the thing about it that it really irritates me is that if you dig into it a little bit, really the goal is to basically allay fears of a possible future that just has no chance of becoming a real future, really, at least not with this stuff. It's ridiculous. So, um, when it comes to ethics like that, if in some state some employer wanted to incentivize the chip, right, and say, yeah, if you want to get a chip implant, it's good for us because we don't have to manage all the times. Employees lose work badges, security tokens all the time, and it's a huge hassle because you've already secured everything to this thing, and now you have to unsecure it all and resecure it to a new thing. And so it is a pain in the butt, and it does cost companies money when this happens. So if a company was to say, well, we'll pay for the implant procedure and the implant if you want to get one, that's great. The ethical dilemma there might be if the company wants to retain some form of ownership over that or some sort of locked thing. So like if they provide the implant, but then they, for example, set encryption keys that are locked to the company so that if you ever left, it would be a useless thing in your body. It's not yours, right? That would be an ethical dilemma, but it doesn't have to do with the chip. It has to do with who's programming it and why. It's the decision to get a chip at the behest of a company who's willing to incentivize it. In those scenarios, it should be the customers, or not the customer, but it should be the employee's perk or benefit. Like they own it; it's their property, not the company's, and they're just simply using it. So, like in a scenario of like, bring your own device, a lot of companies are basically saying, well, we don't want to issue you a smartphone now. Just bring your own. Because companies are tired of doing that. Employees are tired of carrying two phones, which is ridiculous. So there's a lot of situations now where it's bring your own device, BYOD. And in this scenario, if you don't have a smartphone and the company wants you to have one so that you can access applications or do whatever you need to do, they will buy one for you and it's yours. It's not the company's property. They just get one for you as a perk, as a benefit, and then you can join the club and do what you need to do for the job. If the chip implant was treated the same way, no problem. I don't see any ethical issue there. So that if the employee chose to leave, the chip implant is still the employee's property, and they're able to, reset it or to do whatever they need to do in order to use it for their own purposes if they want. So I don't see any ethical problems there. Um, so now that microchipping is gradually being accepted in society, do you think it is the future? Well, I mean, yeah, it is. I think it's the future just because people want to improve their capabilities as humans. This is, since the day we picked up rocks and sticks, we are a tool using species, and we'll continue to improve our tools and improve our own capabilities. You pick up a stick, you have a more leverage, a longer reach, you have a harder hit or whatever you need to do. Like it's about improving yourself. We want to fly, so we make an airplane, and now we can fly. So all these tools and things have been external up till now, and all the things that go internal have been restorative technologies, things that try to elevate capability to a normal level, whatever that is. That's the attempt, right? So you have a bum heart, you get a pacemaker, it's trying to elevate you back to restoration, right? It's about getting you back to a level of normal. But human augmentation, going beyond that, increasing capabilities, improving or adding new capabilities, this is now becoming possible in a way that fundamentally is different from a psychological and a philosophical perspective from, say, picking up a cell phone. Like you pick up a phone, you're like a god because you have access to all this information. You can call anybody, you can reach out and touch and communicate with people, have a FaceTime conversation, all that. But when you put the phone down, now you're no longer a god. Sorry. And so the idea that the phone makes you an amazing capability is true, but it's not part of who you are. It's not as much as people, love their cell phones and feel like it's a part of them. It's not. And so when you have technology that goes inside of you and hits these kind of tenets, which are permanence, an expectation of permanence anyway, and essentially like a management-free experience. So, like I said, your kidneys are working hard for you, your heart's doing its job. You don't really think about them much, and they just kind of do their thing. And it's part of, your capabilities as a human being to filter your blood, eat food, like all this stuff is just inherently part of what makes you up. And so a well-designed implant that increases your capabilities, augments your capabilities, but doesn't suddenly require all this management that feels foreign or outside of your daily routine, then just like walking around and breathing, not your routine of like getting coffee, but just sitting and being. Um, those kind of technologies are coming, and they will improve the human capabilities, human condition over time, and it's just going to get more and more interesting as things go along. So like right now, these transponders just sit passively under the skin. The fact that they're under the skin, they're managementless, frictionless, they're always there, always ready to do their job, and you don't manage them or think about them at all. All of those things, and the expectation of permanence, all those things tend to change your perception of self because they're just part of who you are now, and you don't have to think about it or manage anything. Um, those kind of technologies are going to change. There's going to be more interaction with the biology. There's going to be more a lean towards cybernetics, where there is a kind of um, augmentation that has something to do with maybe the nervous system or the endocrine system or both or all of those things. So there's going to be this constant march of improvement on human capabilities for different reasons. Could be war, could be spacefaring, species, that wants people that want to go into space, and we alter our DNA and our physical makeup with devices and implants to be able to do that more efficiently. And humanity itself may even split off into multiple species eventually. I mean, once we start getting out there among the stars and wanting to, we have the freedom, the scientific freedom to change fundamentally who we are at a DNA level. It's going to be real crazy, but there's always it's just the way it's going to be. There's no changing humanity. That's if there's any definition of humanity, what makes a person human, it is that. It is the curiosity and the drive to improve your capabilities. That defines what a human is to me anyway. And so, regardless of what all the stuff that happens, that's that's humanity in a nutshell. Any other comments on more technology behind chips in general would be appreciated. Well, yeah, there's stuff coming down the road, but not something that I'm able to talk about at this point. So, but yeah, 2021 should be interesting. And that's it. So, hope this answered your questions. And of course, if there's any more follow-ups or anything, just send them.